Hello everyone. So in this video, we'll be discussing about another new feature that UiPath introduced in 20.10 release. It's about multiple entry points for a process. So as you know, up to this point when we are designing processes, we had only one main XML file in a solution. And whatever we do when we are executing the process through the orchestrator or through UiPath assistant, the process starts from the main XML file itself or whatever the file that you have defined as the main file in the solution. But when we are going ahead with scenarios, in some cases we need to access each and every individual file to do certain processes. For example, there can be a process where you need to access different sub processes in the same process to handle certain things. Let's take a simple example here. Um, so assume there's a process where you need to do simple calculations or simple data manipulations, and in that process you have multiple workflows to handle certain things. So in my example over here, I have a process where I have two workflow files to perform addition of two numbers and multiplication of two numbers. So if you are to handle this kind of a scenario, um, depending on the operator we provide, assume that user is going to provide an operator along with the number, just like a calculator. Depending on the operator, you need to identify which workflow to execute. So before all this time, we had to have another workflow to identify what's the operator and invoke the workflow inside that process itself. So the difference here is now with this multiple entry, you can define multiple multiple workflows where you can enter or execute the process. So the advantage of doing this is you can have or you can create separate processes that handle certain common uh, tasks but different to each other. For example, assume that you have a process that interacts with the database. So what do you do when you are interacting with the database? You insert records, you update, delete, and you also query for new records. So all these things can be put into a separate process and you can have multiple entries for these actions and execute the same process to perform multiple different things by entering into the process through a different workflow each time. So this is something similar that I'm going to show you in this video. So as I explained earlier, in a process, when we define it as the main uh, workflow, that main workflow is highlighted in kind of like a bold text. So likewise, you can always set workflow as the main, but each time that is the workflow that's going to execute by default to start the process. But here what I'm going to show you is assume that this is my main workflow, but depending on certain scenario or a certain input that comes in for another process, from another process, I need to execute different functions in this particular process, like the addition and multiply. So I have another process over here where I get input. So the user will input two values, number one and number two, through input dialogues, and the user will also provide the operator, whether the user needs to perform the addition or the multiplication. And based on that input, I'm going to invoke another process uh, to perform the action. So this is the sample workflow that I have developed for this, so I'll get back to this later. So before that, considering this scenario, this is the process that I need to invoke based on the user input. And I have the addition XML file where I get the two numbers and I perform the addition and assign it to a variable and show it in a message box. And on the other workflow, I get the two numbers again, and this time I'm going to multiply that instead of summing it up and showing it in a message box. So by default, this addition is the main workflow and it will be invoked all the time when I invoke the process. But I need to invoke this multiply XML workflow as well, depending on the user's selection. So all you need to do is you can right click on this. So this is already enabled. So all you need to do is you need to right click on this and select enable entry point. So you can also see a small arrow, a green color arrow along with the icon of the file that says that you have enabled entry point to these two workflows. So that means when you are invoking a process, you can start the process either from the main or the addition XML or through the other files that you have mentioned as entry point. So, so there is a very simple scenario that I use to explain this concept. So once you have done that, you can simply publish it to Orchestrator. So let's do that now. So I'll publish it to a separate folder. So the benefit of doing this is you can have separate processes in kind of like a layered architecture in the entire process. So in other words, when you're developing automation solutions, sometimes you have to create multiple automation processes to handle the entire automation, just like the dispatcher and perform processes that we have all learned throughout the academic courses. Similarly, there can be scenarios where you need to have some layered architecture where uh, you need to invoke processors to perform various different things like data manipulations or database related interactions, just like I mentioned earlier. And in such cases, having this kind of entry point is very helpful. So since we have already published, let's get to the orchestrator. So this is my folder, and if I go to folder packages, I see my process. So let's create a process from that. So there's nothing different in setting up the process in the orchestrator as of now. So all you need to do is to create the process, and this is your process name. So this is the difference. Now in your other process, So whenever you are invoking this process, you need to now define from which workflow that you need to start the process. So going back to my other process, so I have uh, three variables over here: test value 2, and selected operation. So these three are populated through these three input dialog activities. First one will get the first value that you enter, second value, and here we are specifying what sort of operation that you are going to do. So it's easy to set it up. You can select this input type as multiple choice, and you can give the options that you need to have separated by a semicolon, and get that value to a variable. And so here we get two options. So the output of this will be this end text of the option you select. So if you select addition, you will get the text addition. If you select multiplication, you will get the text multiplication. And now based on this, I need to invoke that process we published through different workflows. So I'm using a flowchart here for us to easily visualize this. So in the flowchart, I have a flow switch, and in properties, I'm providing the selected operation, which is a string because it gives us the text, and I'm outputting 1 as the addition. So once you drag this line, so I can show you that. So once you drag this option and connect to the invoke process, by default it says default or case 1, case 2, and so on. So I can show you the other option as well. So this says case 1. So just by connecting it, it won't identify what values you are getting from it. So you need to specify. If you get addition, you have to go on this path, and if you get multiplication as the text, you have to go on this path. So let's do that. And you have to select this line, go to properties, and under default case type, provide the text that you get from the input dialogs. It's addition. So it has to be similar to what you see over here. And for the next one, select it, and it's multiplication. So remember, you don't need to provide double quotation over here. Just providing the text will be sufficient. And so this is the interesting part. Now you're going to use invoke process. So in this invoke process, I'm going to invoke the addition. So I have two workflows now in that same process. So I'm going to provide the process name over here. So this name is exactly the same as what you see over here. If you can copy and paste it as well. And for the entry point, here by default, if you do not provide anything, it will invoke the main XML file by default. But if you need to, uh, since you have multiple entry points, you can define what workflow that you need to use. So for the sum operation, in my other process, addition XML is the default or the main, but I will provide the file name here, addition. And under arguments, you have to provide what arguments this workflow file is expecting. So in our case, for addition, we have two input arguments, the two numbers in integer type. So use this name, argument name, and in edit arguments, provide the argument name in the workflow, set the direction as input, and the type is int. Now this test value 1 and test value 2 is of string type because user is entering that, and input dialog is capturing it as string. So we are converting it here into integer to the type that our workflow is expecting. And we have one more thing to do. In the properties, you need to specify where this process is. So by default, when you invoke this process while you're running, it will look for this process in the default folder in the orchestrator, which means in this folder. But we have published it into a different folder. So in that case, you need to provide the folder path. So for orchestrator folder path, I have provided my folder name. And for target session, you can say that this process has to be executed in the current session, or whether you need to execute in a picture in picture or any other option that you need. So I'll set it as current. So the entry point, we have defined it, and for the other process, for now multiply is the same. Only thing different is the entry point. Here you are defining the other XML file as the entry point, so that this time it's not the main file, but it is, we enable it as an entry point for that process. So by doing this, you invoke the same process but from different places to perform different actions and to get an output from the same process. So going back to my example of databases. So as I said earlier, we can have a separate process that handle all these database related actions for a specific use case. And we can have 4 different workflows in the same process, where one workflow is always doing the selection or querying depending on the query that you provide, and another workflow will do the update, another workflow will do the insert, but you are invoking the same process over and over again to perform different actions. So that's the benefit of having these multiple entry points. So because it enables you to design your entire solution in a layered architecture, which comes as a best practice as well. So since we have developed this workflow now, let's give it a try and see how it works. And we have already published our other solution into Orchestrator. So let's run this. Okay, so here we have the first input dialog. I will say 1, 10, and 30, 20. And this is the multiple choice operation which we defined here. So I'll go for addition, and you can see it's executing the process, Invoke process, and we got the message box saying the value is 30. So this message box is coming from that other process. Yeah, so this process executed inside our master process itself, and we got the update. And let's try the other option now. I'm running the same process again, and this time I will do the multiplication. So 25, 5, and let's see how it works. And again you can see it's invoking, and this time we got the different message box saying the multiplication value is 125. So you can invoke process using invoke process as well, and the other option you have is you can invoke this parallelly. So you can use the run parallel process to run these processes. So let's try that now. So instead of using invoke process over here, I will remove this for now, and I will use run parallel process, and let's see how that works. So I need to provide the text again. So what happens in run parallel process is while this process is running, the other process will run parallel to the process that's already running and provide you the input, the output. So in invoke process, it ran inside the same process, but in parallel process, this the master process over here, or the process that we are running, will give the run command to the other process, and it will continue executing, and the and our other process, which handles the multiplication and addition, will run separately and give you the output without waiting for the main process over here. So I need to give the process name again, which I can copy from this one. This is my process, and entry point I'm going to say is multiply XML, multiply, and the orchestrator path is my folder, which is test package feed, which again I can copy from my other process, and it will be in the same current session. So I need to provide the arguments now. So let's create the arguments in entry value 1. So I'm using the same argument names you see here in the multiply workflow. In entry value 2, the type is in 32, and I'm converting our output value 1, and here is test value 2. Right, so we have done that, and let's see how this works now. So I'm going to run this our process. So we know that addition is already working because we didn't do any change there. So we'll try to run the multiplication. So this process actually stopped, and my other process gave an error. It's because it says a foreground process is already running and only one foreground process can run at a time. Yes. So, so all you need to do is when you are running parallel processes in the same machine, um, you cannot run multiple foreground processes as we know. So you can do one small thing. You can get back to our process over here where you have that addition and multiplication. Go to project settings and set it as start in background. And okay, and we'll save. And we have to publish again. And I'm going to publish into my folder. So published successfully. Get to Orchestrator, uh, folder packages. This is our process. And for processes, we need to update them. Go to view process, upgrade it through this option, close. So now we have updated version and let's see whether it actually runs in the background. So in jobs, you can actually see our first uh, attempt to run it parallelly has faulted because it wasn't set as a background process. So let's try that now. Okay, I'm going to run this. And I will give some input and multiplication start, and you can see that process executed, and you also notice that this process actually completed and later you got the message box. And if you check the assistant, uh, can you can see our background process executing. So that's how you can build processors with multiple entry points where you can design your solutions in different layers to perform various different tasks, but within the same process itself. So I hope this video will be helpful in identifying or understanding how you should build or design your process in a way that can support various layers and to support different actions that are common to a specific task like databases. And I hope that you understood the concept behind multiple entry points and why it is useful to have in designing this kind of process. So thank you very much, and I will see you in another video. Have a good day.